Well, we've been talking about the potential of a Canadian rail strike here for several weeks now. And as of midnight on Thursday morning, Canadian Pacific Kansas City and Canadian National have officially locked out some 9,000 employees, I believe. What is the latest going on with this situation? We want to talk about it. Joining us now to share details, he's the host of Real Ag Radio on SiriusXM 147. Shaun Haney is with us here today. Shaun, thanks so much for joining us. And I mean, this is just an unprecedented, tough situation going on with railroads in Canada right now, isn't it?
Yeah, Jesse, absolutely. A lot of times we overuse words, and unprecedented sometimes is one of those. Like, oh, this situation's unprecedented. Well, in this case, it's probably an understatement. This is something that has never happened in the country of Canada. Both national railways, as you mentioned, both stopped as of midnight on August 22nd. No trains moving. So it is a quiet country. And for a country that is so geographically large, similar to the United States, rail is an important component of a lot of goods going in and out of the country. This is going to take its toll very, very quickly on a lot of things, not just in agriculture, but also for just Canadians in general.
Very true. And we'll talk about that in a second. I want to get a little background from you. From what I understand, there's been a lot of negotiating going on with the TCRC, the Teamsters Canada Rail Conference, and trying to figure out a new contract. And I know things have gotten a little contentious. What can you share as far as details there?
Yeah, the gap is big. It's when you read some of the press releases from the union as well as from the railways, they both mention this gap, and it's not necessarily about hourly pay. A lot of this is about scheduling and days off and safety and things like that. CN has been very communicative when it comes to hey, putting numbers on the board. Here's what engineers make. What do you think about this? Almost kind of trying to sway Canadians in their direction for sure. Farm groups and actually the railways. CN has been putting a bunch of stuff on social media the past 2 days, pushing for binding arbitration. And I think that seems to be from that side of the equation, industry groups as well as the railways. That seems to be the real quick way to a conclusion on this strike. It also shows that I think the railways think they have negotiating leverage when it comes, if there was to actually be binding arbitration put in place. But the Labour Minister for Canada, Minister McKinnon, said last Friday that he would not force the two sides into binding arbitration. And so we have a situation where the Liberals are definitely trying to regain some of the popularity as the current government. And the unions are a path to that. So they are going to slow play this. And it seems that even though there's significant consequences to the Canadian economy, the votes are more important.
Well, and I noticed you had an opinion piece on realagriculture.com as well, talking about this and talking about how it seems like a lot of folks are comfortable with this strike happening and this lockout happening. I mean, it's a very interesting situation. And I know from the US side, there have been a lot of ag groups that have been kind of sounding the alarm bells because that cross border trade between the two countries is so intertwined and interlinked that depending on how long this goes for, this could be pretty substantial here for ag trade specifically, but a lot of other areas as well, Shaun.
Yeah, well, Quorum, who is an analyst in the area of railways and their efficiency and productivity, said that a 1-week strike, it will take 14 weeks to get back up to full capacity. It's not just like this valve that you turn on and off and, hey, we're back. This is something that takes a long time to ramp down and ramp back up. There's big consequences here on the U.S. side of the border, and I think that's one of the paths to solution for the Canadian government to actually act. I think if you think back to, remember when the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor was blocked during some of the blockades during the pandemic? Well, one of the reasons the Canadian government actually finally took action to clear that bridge was the White House calling the Prime Minister's office and saying, fix it. And I think that's one of the things that's going to take in this situation as well. You think about corn coming north into Canada. You think about Canada being the largest purchaser of U.S. ethanol. as examples. I heard on some financial news networks in the U.S. this morning, people talking about insulin made in Canada.
Yeah.
U.S. gas prices, 100,000 barrels a day of oil come out of Canada into the U.S. This is going to have big impacts. I know NCGA sent out a release earlier this week. I actually ran to Kent Backus with NCBA yesterday. They are concerned at NCBA about some of the ramifications of this strike. It can. We're into day one. Let's hope that this gets fixed very, very quickly.
Very true. And I've talked with folks with the American Farm Bureau as well. They are sounding the alarm bells. They are very concerned about this. And that's just one of many. The NGFA, the National Grain and Feed Association, of course, as well. And I think about this too with where we're at in the calendar, Shaun. If this extends out, for a while, we got spring wheat harvest. You mentioned some of the commodities that move back and forth, but I think about spring wheat in the northern plains that's got to, a lot of times go up through Canada to get to the PNW ports. That's going to be an issue. But another thing too, I think about is, I'm spending time in northern Iowa this week. I remember as a kid seeing all the potash trains coming down through my small town. The amount of potash that moves out of Canada into the U.S. here during the fall season specifically, that could be huge for the fertilizer market as well, Shaun.
Yeah, I'm sitting right now in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan at the Canadian Beef Industry Conference, and Saskatchewan is the world's largest producer of potash. And one of the biggest markets for that potash is the United States. And so I agree very, very much with you, Jesse, that is one of the big impacts indeed. One of the other things that I'm hearing a lot from farmers is anhydrous ammonia. You think about the fall season, that's when that's being applied for fall fertilization. They haven't been moving anhydrous ammonia for like 10 days because they didn't want it to be stranded and have the liability of storage, right? So that's, again, the slow ramp down when it comes to some of the rail capacity. The whole thing here is that I think rail service is one of those things we take for granted. Like we sort of see the trains move and we don't think of it. Think back to when there was supply crunches when it came to the pandemic and people were loading up on toilet paper and stuff. All of a sudden you were talking about it. I was talking about it. Supply chains were just the thing that we all of a sudden were like, oh yeah, these things do come from all over the place. Well, when you have countries the size of Canada and the United States, rail is a very valuable option from a price perspective to get goods from one place to another. And when all of a sudden, when you don't have the rail service, I think we're gonna have a greater appreciation for the underbelly that the railway is for our economy. And it's grinding to a halt, man.
Yeah, very, very true. And it could even have ripple effects down to Mexico, for instance, with how just all the North American rail system is linked together. I guess, Shaun, as we kind of wrap up here, what should we really be watching for in the next day or two ahead? I mean, what's some of the indication? Are negotiations ongoing? What should we be keeping an eye out for right now?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we should be watching out for is how does the U.S. react to this? Does the U.S. put that pressure on quickly on the Canadian government? Remember, though, too, it's the Biden administration also is trying to win an election and also looking for that labor vote as well as the Republicans too. So that's going to be that could be a bit of a factor on how quickly they act. The other thing that I would watch here is what do we hear out of the Canadian government? Do we start to hear them talking about it? Because it's been very mute. Also, the Canadian Conservatives, the opposition party, has been totally mute as well for political reasons, trying to get that labor vote with the union. So I would pay attention the next 48 hours to both governments on both sides of the border. Do we hear a little bit more verbiage here, trying to encourage maybe faster negotiations or that push for the binding arbitration like the railways want?
Well, we appreciate the insight and the time, and we'll stay in touch with you as well as things develop. And I know you'll have coverage on Real Ag Radio and realagriculture.com as well. Shaun Haney, thanks for joining us here today. Appreciate the time. We'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jesse. Really appreciate it.